Hi everyone, Rafeeq Bosch. I'm going to talk to you tonight about the dark side of the fourth industrial revolution. Before I go into my, let's see how this works now. Before I go into my content, I want to, start out with a bit of a fatalistic, controversial statement by saying that, yeah, guys, I'm sorry, the bad news is the dark future has already been written. Okay, it's too late. Now, when I say that, when I say that, what I mean that it's already been written about, right, in science fiction. I think Mina made the point as well. Science fiction, you don't have to go very far into any kind of science fiction library to find a ton of really good stories that describe how differing access in technology. Wow, these lights are incredibly bright, guys. Are you all still there? Yeah, okay, I see you there, okay. How different access to technology divides up society and then invariably some really dire consequences that flow from that. I want to focus your guys' minds before I get into my detail on one particular story by really a legend of sci-fi writing, H.G. Wells. Before 1900, wrote a book called The Time Machine. That story has been made into at least two movies that I'm aware of, one in the 1960s and one more recently, 2002. And the Time Machine really tells the story of a time traveler who goes into the far distant future and arrives still on Earth, but arrives to find a civilization, or that human civilization is divided up into really two tribes. There's the sort of elite tribe, the Eloi, who really enjoy everything of technology, access to human knowledge, all of that great stuff. And then there is the Morlocks, which is really the rabble class, right? They literally live under the feet of the Morlocks. In H.G. Wells' story, there's a relationship between these two facets of humanity that's quite dark and disturbing. And I thought it was initially going to be about the fact that even from 1960 to 2002, they kept the same wigs. But it's really much darker, far more disturbing than that. Okay, guys? All right. So let's just keep that in the back of your mind as I go through my story tonight. I've really got 3 points I'm going to talk to you guys about. I'll talk about the digital divide and how it connects to conflict. A little bit of discussion about the fourth industrial revolution, and then really transition into a conversation about the playmakers within that fourth industrial revolution. I have about... When I rehearsed my presentation earlier, there's like 25 minutes of material here, and I've got a 15-minute slot. So I decided I'm going to hop over some stuff, and I got to say, Alex, thank you very much, because it's like my presentation is a companion piece to yours. You've really dealt with a lot of the things in the fourth industrial revolution for me. Thank you very much. But yeah, that's going to essentially be the story. Okay, so let's jump in. The digital divide, lots of different ways to define it, to measure it. This graphic, which is sourced from, which is based on data sourced from the International Telecommunications Union, really paints a nice picture. It's showing like in every country in the world, it color codes the country based on what percentage of that country's population is access on the internet, right? When I look at this picture, and there's definitely something going on in the middle zone there, all the blues kind of at the two ends. And I know if there are any Tolkien fans in the audience, this concept of Middle-earth is always appealing and so on. But to me, this is more a story about lower Earth, okay, people? So that, at some level, is quite worrying. There's a different view of the same data, which I think illustrates this point of digital divide much more clearly. So this graph says, sort of groups the world into OECD countries, or the developed world, the first world, whatever term you want to use. Then traces a line over time about what portion of the population had access to the internet. It then does the same thing for the developing world, and then there's a global average, that green line in the middle. So that's a cool graph. But what scares me is that most people in the world happen to live down here on the blue line, right? So again, there's definitely some kind of a gap going on here between the developed world and the developing world, okay? So I had some slides here about, sorry, I need to get some water. I had some slides and discussion here about quantifying the gap in economic terms, and there's lots of other terminology like horizontal inequality and so on, but I'm just going to short circuit through all of that for the sake of time and say that the fact that there's a gap is a problem. In 2017, the PRIO, which is the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, published a study that, again, it's a massive study, but the scary part of it is this notion of horizontal inequality, which is different from vertical inequality. So Gini coefficients, which is economic inequality, is a vertical kind of inequality. It's quite controversial about whether that leads to conflict. So PRIO says the data on that, the jury's still out. But the scary part in the context of the Industrial Revolution is horizontal inequality, which is what we mean when we talk about people who have access. It's like softer, right? People who are of a certain ethnicity versus people of other ethnicity. People who speak a certain language versus another language. People who have access to the internet or are technologically served versus those who aren't. There is already a strong, solid case building for the idea that, well, you can read it there. Horizontal inequalities make violent crime more likely. Okay, so people, there is a problem. I'm going to move on now to the fourth industrial revolution, just a really quick primer, not even a primer. I mean, this slide really just sort of takes us through from the first industrial revolution, which is where this industrialization concept kind of comes from. The second industrial revolution, to me, is really about electrification. And in the third industrial revolution, what most of us, I guess, grew up through is computerization. And here we stand on the brink of the age of intelligent machines, right? The fourth industrial revolution. Again, it's probably a lot of different debates about what the boundaries are between each one. And I think some people here might even be surprised to learn that there's quite a lot of robust debate, even about whether there is such a thing as a fourth industrial revolution. But I spent a bit of time looking at this excellent resource from the World Economic Forum, and I defy anybody who's been on that for 2 hours to come out of there and still argue against the existence of the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, so that's maybe a good resource people can have a look at when they have a chance. I was going to go here into sort of a bit of a sidebar about other things, but I'm going to just skip through that and really go back to I'm going to go back to, yeah, exactly. Let's not talk about that. Okay. I'm going to go back to just that graphic that we spoke about, the digital divide graphic, and just try and put it in the context, okay, of fourth industrial revolution. So I'm kind of arguing that the whole world, on average, if you added up everyone, the whole world is roughly at the second industrial revolution, at least. It's hard to think, like, you probably in most inhabited parts of the world can find some form of fixed line or portable source of electricity, right? So electrification is pretty much everyone's reality, even in the emerging world. Some nations in the emerging economies, or some emerging economy nations like India and the Philippines, managed to kind of break out of that second industrial revolution into the third industrial revolution. It's hard to think about things like, and in fact, they shaped the third industrial revolution in quite an intrinsic way. It's hard to think about offshore call centers, offshore IT operations without thinking about India. The Philippines is a powerhouse in offshore software development. So some emerging economy countries have actually been able to make the transition. And the PhD that I'm so excited about, Nick, sorry, I was even excited before then. That's what it takes, people, lots of excitement. What I'm trying to figure out is, can we learn something from how those countries came out of the second industrial revolution to participate in the third, in a way that the fourth industrial revolution we can kind of see the same dynamic happening? And can we apply future studies techniques to make that happen more often and so on? So I think that's great, and I have years to figure that out, so wish me luck. The part that I'm much more worried about is what happens when third or emerging economy nations can't break out of that, and kind of the world moves on into the fourth industrial revolution. Because if you think about what's going on in India, what's going on in the Philippines, the demand for their entry into the third industrial revolution is predicated in some sense on the existence that 3IR is the state of the art. When the state of the art moves on, we know that this group, their services, the demand for it is going to evaporate, right? And the part that I worry about is as we backslide, well, we see our friends, the Morlocks, there again, okay? So this, to me, is pretty dark stuff. Okay, I want to talk now about playmakers in the fourth industrial revolution. And there's this very ominous acronym that I'm sure maybe some of you are familiar with. It says FANG. And what FANG is the top 5 companies in the US, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, who between them have a combined market capitalization of $3.25 trillion, okay, a lot of money. I love how the Guardian newspaper contextualizes this, because the Guardian says that $3.25 trillion is more money than the combined market capitalization of the top 100 companies in the UK. And after Brexit, it's probably going to be the top 200 companies in the UK. If you stacked all the big companies in France and Germany on top of each other, you still don't get to $3.25 trillion. So FANG, guys, they are legitimately huge, okay? No debate on that. So FANG and other tech giants like SAP, IBM, Microsoft, and so on, they deserve an honorable mention. They are plowing millions into fourth industrial revolution capability development, okay? Big bucks there. So I then bring this, our friend graphic that we've seen before, bring that back into the discussion and ask myself, if these are the guys plowing all the money, the engine of the fourth industrial, how does that look in the context of these geographies, right? In the context of these territories. I pulled up China, I pulled up Africa as 2 poster children for this, and just did a very rough sort of assessment of for each. So for Facebook, for Amazon, for Google, I asked, what's the accessibility of those services in those territories? Nick, we okay for time? For Apple, I took a slightly different tack because I said, what's their market share for mobile devices? The emerging world mobility is huge, right? And then for Netflix, it was really a discussion about can we find locally relevant content, even if they're available in emerging market economies, is the content really relevant and local? And people, the scorecard really doesn't look that encouraging, okay? Far too little green there to give anybody a sense of comfort. So this assessment, whatever you want to call it, makes me think, okay, so if these guys are not thinking of this emerging, this lower Earth zone, I mean, if they think of it as a market rather than a place where they can have a domain of operations, influence those environments, what are they thinking, right? Can we really trust what's going on with these companies? And I made a reference to Lord of the Rings or Tolkien fans earlier, but Star Wars fans in the audience, don't be disappointed, because this is your time to shine. We're just going to go through an assessment of trying to pick a character from the Star Wars universe, right, to represent each of those companies, just based on what we know in the general media about all of these, right? So let's start with Facebook. And look at that smile, guys. I mean, isn't that a smile anyone could love? You all know this picture. This is one of the many photographs taken of Mark Zuckerberg during the congressional hearings. I think Alex mentioned this earlier. Facebook had to explain why they allowed people to try and influence external players to influence the US elections, and also why they didn't do a better job of protecting all our data, right? Zuckerberg came off quite unapologetic during those hearings, and many people said his performance was pretty wooden. So I think between that and the open flirtation with the dark side, I mean, it's got to be Kylo Ren for the Facebook poster boy there, right? All right, Apple does a little bit better. Lots of feel-good stories when you look around the news. Apple's trying to reduce their mining of rare earth minerals. And Tim Cook, I think, scored some hero points during that San Bernardino mass shooting when he refused to build a backdoor into iPhone software so that the FBI and folks could kind of hack into all our iPhones. But Apple, if you follow those stories through to their end, it's hard to see, or what you see every time is, despite their best intentions, Apple can't really prevent bad things from happening or people doing bad things with their products. But I think their heart's in the right place. So for that, we'll credit them with a Han Solo mascot, okay? Cool, let's move on. That's a picture of the richest man in the world, okay? That's Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon. He's laughing. I think at this point, every photo of Jeff Bezos should just be him having a good laugh, right? I looked up his net worth yesterday. It's $140 billion, people. I remember in 1995 when Bill Gates said $10 billion, somebody said to me, Rafeeq, if you earned $100 million every year for the rest of your life and you didn't spend a single cent of it, you still wouldn't have as much money as Bill Gates. And he only had $10 billion, right? This dude's sitting on $140 billion. He could single-handedly solve poverty in Africa. I think the price of that is about $30 billion and still be the wealthiest man in the world. So, I mean, kudos to Jeff, right? And I think it's that size and the dominance maybe attracts a lot of haters towards Amazon. But notwithstanding all that, I think if you see the red commentary there, Jeff and his crew haven't also been trusted to always kind of keep their hands clean. There's some questionable stuff going on there. But I think just that sheer scale and the force is strong with himness. Who else other than Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, of course, right? Couldn't find that much on Netflix. I always like Netflix. I think Netflix is doing a lot of cool things. You know, you either find them adorable. Who doesn't love a Netflix and chill session? A good one, especially. And but on the other hand, you might find them annoying because why does every film have to be in 15 categories, right? So I struggle a little bit with Netflix. They're ultimately inconsequential to our story. So I think an Ewok is probably the right mascot to give to Netflix, and then that brings us to the big behemoth Google. Lots of different stories around Google. If you look around, very hard to figure out what's really going on with them. This picture caused a lot of controversy in 2015. People thought Google was busy investing in floating data centers. I always thought that was, part of global warming. They just really want to be very well. There's DR to the nth degree. They came out and denied that flatly and gave some BS cover story, which really didn't hold water, pardon the pun. I think so with Google, what always occupies my mind is here's a company that tells its employees, don't be evil. And then it tells everyone in the world, we tell our employees, don't be evil. Now, if that doesn't set your spidey sense tinkling, it certainly sets mine going wild. Definitely something insidious going on there. I mean, the name is in the word. Who else than Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine, to act as their mascot? Okay, so that's just a little bit of harmless fun. If there's Dungeons and Dragons fans, you all recognize this as a moral alignment chart. But people, isn't it terrifying, right? When you try and map these people, these mascots, onto this chart, you kind of just slide off the bottom right corner straight into the dark side, okay? So that's not very encouraging. You can say that, it's easy to find the negative stuff. My problem here is it's very hard to find a consistent story about goodness coming out of these companies, and that makes me worry. Okay, let me wrap up. 3 key messages. The digital divide is a big red flag. It's telling us something about the future. It's telling us something important about the 4th Industrial Revolution. Second, the 4th Industrial Revolution is going to widen whatever technology gap exists today in society. And as bad as that is, I think I've shown you some ideas here that makes you think it's going to get worse. And the people or the companies driving these 4th Industrial Revolution innovations have really made some choices that make us question their motives and their intent. They certainly have impressive global reach, but what's lacking, in my view, is that global thinking. And so I think until those 2 things start to marry up, I'll continue to remain concerned about them. And that, people, is the dark industrial revolution. Now, if that isn't dark enough for you, I alluded to something sinister in the relationship between our friends, the Eloi and the Morlocks. It turns out in H.G. Wells' story that the Morlocks are so bereft people that they have so little that every now and then, periodically, they have to capture an Eloi and eat it. This is their source of food. And I think that's just about as dark as it gets, right? So on that delightfully cannibalistic note, I'll kick over into some legal stuff. These talks are going to be on the internet, there to live forever. So I thought, let me just give myself some legal coverage. And while the disclaimers are scrolling, Nick, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here tonight. It's been enormous fun preparing for this. Nick says that if you're a futurist, you're also an activist, and that is an idea that really resonates for me. I know we've been focused on the very dark side of things here tonight, but I'm always happy to talk about the brighter side of what's going on in our topic after the session. Thank you all very much for listening to me, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.